Before we unlock the classified files of this forgotten incident, please remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a story from the hidden history of the Cold War. In the autumn of 1985, the Cold War had entered a phase of high-tech paranoia. The Strategic Defense Initiative, derisively known as Star Wars, was dominating headlines, and the fear of a nuclear exchange had moved from the battlefield to the atmosphere. Both Washington and Moscow were looking upward, scanning the blackness of space for the first blink of an enemy satellite. But in a small, clutter-filled dormitory room at the University of Washington in Seattle, 3 students were looking up for a very different reason. They weren't soldiers, they weren't spies, and they certainly weren't ideologues. They were bored. Their names were erratic variables in a stable equation. There was Daniel Thorne, a 21-year-old electrical engineering major who could fix a toaster with a paperclip but struggled to hand in his humanities essays on time. There was Sarah Jenkins, a physics prodigy who understood orbital mechanics better than most of her professors. And then there was Marcus Lee, a computer science student who spent more time on the university's VAX mainframe than he did in his own bed. They were the kind of students who lived in the margins of campus life, fueled by cheap coffee and the thrill of solving problems that didn't have answers in the back of the textbook. On the night of October 14, 1985, their problem was reception. The trio had spent the better part of the semester building what they jokingly called the Big Ear, a chaotic assembly of modified television dishes, scavenged radio receivers, and copper wire that took up most of the roof of their off-campus rental house. Their goal was innocent enough, at least in their minds. They wanted to intercept the raw weather telemetry from the NOAA-9 satellite as it passed overhead. It was a challenge making the rounds in the amateur radio community. Catch the signal, decode the image, and print out a grain photo of the Pacific Northwest weather system from space. It was a badge of honor, a way to prove that they could out-engineer the commercially available equipment. But that night, the weather was fighting them. A heavy storm was battering Seattle, rain lashing against the windows of their attic workspace. Daniel was manning the receiver, his fingers making micro-adjustments to the dial, frowning as the static washed over the room speakers. Marcus was at the keyboard of their pride and joy, a second-hand Commodore 64 rigged to a custom interface box, ready to capture the data stream. Sarah was navigating, a stopwatch in one hand and a chart of orbital trajectories in the other. According to Sarah's calculations, the NOAA satellite should have been cresting the horizon at that exact moment. But the speakers only hissed with the white noise of the universe. Daniel spun the dial again, frustration mounting. They had missed the window. The satellite was gone. But just as he reached to power down the receiver, a sound cut through the static. It wasn't the rhythmic chirping pulse of a weather satellite. It was something else. A low digital growl. A dense packet of data that sounded like a zipper being pulled up quickly, over and over again. Daniel froze. He looked at Sarah. This wasn't on the charts. It wasn't on the amateur radio frequencies. It was drifting on a sideband usually reserved for maritime navigation. But the signal strength was immense. It was coming from directly overhead. Marcus, acting on instinct, hit the record command. The Commodore's disk drive whirred to life, the red light blinking furiously as it began to swallow the stream of binary code falling from the sky. They didn't know it yet, but they weren't listening to a weather report. They had just latched onto the encrypted downlink of Cosmos 1689, a Soviet Zenit-class reconnaissance satellite that wasn't supposed to exist. Chapter 2. The Hardware. To understand how 3 college students managed to intercept a military-grade transmission, you have to understand the hardware. In 1985, the concept of hacking was still in its infancy, largely confined to phone phreaking and exploring university networks. The idea of hacking hardware, of physically modifying equipment to do things it was never designed to do, was the domain of a specific subculture. Daniel Thorne was the king of this subculture. The equipment on the roof of the rental house on Elm Street was a testament to American ingenuity and dumpster diving. The primary dish was a 3-meter fiberglass relic salvaged from a defunct motel that had upgraded to cable. Daniel had recoated the surface with a metallic mesh to improve gain and mounted it on a motorized axis taken from a garage door opener. It looked like a piece of junk, but geometrically it was perfect. The receiver was a heavily modified ICOM ham radio unit. Daniel had bypassed the factory filters, soldering in new capacitors and resistors to widen the bandwidth. He wanted to hear everything, the whispers between the cracks of the official frequencies. Inside the attic, the setup was equally improvised. The interface box that connected the radio to the computer was Marcus's creation. He had hand-wired the logic board, creating a modem that could interpret analog audio signals into digital ones and zeros. It was crude. It was prone to overheating. But it was fast. Faster than anything you could buy at an electronics store. When the signal from the mystery satellite hit their system, it pushed the hardware to its breaking point. The Commodore 64, a machine with less computing power than a modern calculator, began to choke on the data rate. The screen filled with garbage characters, random symbols, flashing cursors, blocks of color. It was digital gibberish. "We're losing it," Marcus yelled over the sound of the rain. "The buffer is full. Dump it to the tape drive," Daniel countered, his hands hovering over the radio controls to keep the signal locked. "Don't try to decode it live. Just catch it." Sarah was staring at the signal strength meter. It was pinning the needle. "This isn't a bounce," she said, her voice quiet. "This is a direct line of sight, and it's strong. Whatever this is, it's huge, and it's low orbit." The transmission lasted for exactly 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it vanished into the background radiation of the galaxy. The room fell silent, save for the hum of the cooling fan Marcus had rigged to the computer. They sat in the dim light of the monitors, the smell of ozone and wet wool in the air. On the magnetic tape of the cassette drive sat 3 megabytes of unknown data. They should have erased it. They should have realized that a signal that powerful, on a frequency that wasn't listed in any public registry, belonged to someone dangerous. But curiosity is a powerful drug, especially when you're 21 and think you're the smartest person in the room. They didn't erase it. Instead, they opened a celebratory 6-pack of cheap beer and decided to spend the night cracking the code. They thought they had found a pirate TV station, or maybe a secret corporate communication channel. They had no idea that halfway across the world, in a bunker outside Moscow, a red light had just started blinking on a console at the Glabcosmos Control Center. Chapter 3. The Anomaly. The decoding process took 3 days. The students skipped their classes. They ate takeout pizza. They slept in shifts on the floor of the attic. The data was encrypted, but not in the way modern digital encryption works. It was 1985. Encryption was often a matter of bit shifting or obscure compression algorithms rather than complex mathematical keys. Sarah was the one who found the pattern. She had printed out reams of the binary code on dot matrix paper, taping the sheets to the walls until the room looked like the cell of a conspiracy theorist. She stared at the zeros and ones until her eyes burned. The breakthrough came when she noticed a repeating header. Every 256 bits, the same sequence appeared. "It's a frame," she explained to the others on the morning of the 3rd day. "It's video, but it's not NTSC or PAL, it's a proprietary format. The lines are interlaced differently." Marcus wrote a quick program to rearrange the bits based on Sarah's theory. They gathered around the small, convex monitor of the Commodore. Marcus hit enter. The screen flickered. A gray static washed over the display, and then, slowly, an image resolved. It was grainy, high contrast, black and white, and inverted. It was a picture of the ground. Specifically, it was a picture of a coastline. Is that us?" Daniel asked. Sarah grabbed an atlas. She compared the jagged line on the screen to the maps of the Pacific Northwest. "That's Puget Sound," she whispered. "That's Seattle. This thing took a picture of us." But as the image clarified, they noticed something else. Overlaying the geography were crosshairs, and next to the crosshairs were blocks of Cyrillic text. "Russian," Marcus said, the color draining from his face. "It's Russian." They weren't looking at a weather map. They were looking at the targeting feed of a Soviet spy satellite. And the scary part wasn't just that they had intercepted the image. The scary part was the timestamp. The image was live, or it had been when they recorded it. The realization hit them with physical force. They were holding classified Soviet intelligence. In 1985, Possession of this kind of data was a federal crime. If the Soviets knew they had it, they were targets. If the American government knew they had it, they were suspects. "We need to delete this," Marcus said, his hand trembling as he reached for the disk. "We need to wipe the drives, burn the tapes, and take the dish down." "Wait," Daniel said. He was staring at the data stream again. "Look at the footer of the code." "I don't care about the footer, Dan. It's a Soviet spy bird." "Just look," Daniel insisted. At the end of the data packet, there was a query, a simple command line prompt waiting for a response. The satellite hadn't just broadcast the image, it had opened a diagnostic channel. It was asking for a handshake. It was waiting for instructions from the ground. And because the signal was so strong and their equipment was so sensitive, their computer was currently mimicking the protocol of a Soviet ground station. "It's in maintenance mode," Daniel realized. The storm, the static, it must have triggered a failsafe. It's looking for a command to reset its orientation. "Don't even think about it," Sarah warned. But Daniel was already typing. Chapter 4. The Ping. Daniel didn't intend to hack the satellite. He intended to see if the connection was real. It was the engineer's curse, the need to verify the system. He typed a simple string of characters, a standard handshake protocol used in basic radio teletype. It was a ping, a digital shout into the void to see if there was an echo. He hit return. The transmitter on the roof clicked on. A burst of energy shot up from Elm Street, piercing the clouds, traveling 200 miles into the exosphere. For 10 seconds, nothing happened. The students held their breath. Then, the screen cleared. The Cyrillic text disappeared. A new line of text appeared, this time in English, or rather a transliterated phonetic English used by Soviet programmers. "Command accepted, awaiting input." The room went dead silent. "You just logged in," Marcus whispered. "You just logged into a Soviet military satellite as a root user." "I didn't know it would work," Daniel defended himself, though his voice was an octave higher than usual. "I thought it was encrypted." "It must be a fallback," Sarah said, her mind racing. "If the main control link fails, they probably have a backup frequency for emergency control." We stumbled onto the backdoor keys. They were now controlling a multi-million ruble piece of hardware orbiting the Earth at 17,000 miles per hour. The magnitude of the mistake was absolute. They were 21 years old, and they had arguably just committed an act of war. "Log out," Marcus pleaded. "Disconnect." "I don't know the command to log out," Daniel shouted. "If I just cut the power, it might lock the system. Or worse, it might trigger a self-destruct. Do these things have self-destructs?" "It's a spy satellite, Dan. Of course it has a self-destruct." Panic began to set in. They were trapped in a digital room with a sleeping bear, and they had just poked it. They needed to exit gracefully without waking the beast. Sarah grabbed the keyboard. "We need to tell it to go back to sleep," she said. "We need to send a standby command." She began typing furiously, guessing at the syntax based on the code they had already seen. She sent a string of binary that she hoped translated to resume normal operations. The transmitter clicked again. The screen flashed. Calibration sequence initiated. "That's not normal operations," Daniel groaned. "What did you do?" "I don't know. The syntax is different." On the screen, the numbers began to scroll rapidly. The telemetry data showed the satellite's orientation changing. Pitch, yaw, roll. "You're moving it," Marcus said, horror-struck. "You're physically moving the satellite." Above the atmosphere, Cosmos 1689 fired its maneuvering thrusters. It wasn't a large movement, just a fraction of a degree. But in the precision world of orbital mechanics, a fraction of a degree is the difference between looking at a naval base in Seattle and looking at empty ocean. Or worse, looking at something the satellite was never meant to see. Chapter 5. Moscow 4,000 miles away, inside the TSUP Mission Control Center, in Korolyov near Moscow, a frantic scene was unfolding. Major Valery Petrenko was staring at his console in disbelief. The telemetry from Cosmos 1689 had gone haywire. For the last 5 minutes, the satellite had ceased responding to their encrypted uplink. And now, the sensors indicated the bird was rotating. "Who is commanding the unit?" Petrenko barked at his junior officers. "Is it automatic stabilization?" "Negative, Comrade Major," the lieutenant replied, sweat beading on his forehead. The stabilization gyros are offline. We are detecting an external carrier wave, high frequency, originating from the North American sector. The room went cold. In the context of 1985, this could only mean one thing. The Americans were jamming the satellite, or worse, they were hijacking it. This was the nightmare scenario of the space race. If the Americans could take control of Soviet assets, the entire nuclear balance was null and void. Petrenko reached for the red phone on his desk. This was not a technical glitch. This was a provocation. He had to alert the strategic rocket forces. He had to tell the Kremlin that the United States was actively interfering with a Soviet military asset. "Get me the coordinates of the interference," Petrenko ordered. "Pinpoint the source." "Triangulating now, sir. It appears to be a stationary source. The Pacific Northwest. Washington State." Petrenko gripped the receiver. "Is it a military base? Is it Lewis McChord?" The lieutenant frowned at his screen. "No, sir. The signal is weak. It is amateur grade. It is coming from a residential district." Petrenko paused. "A residential district?" "Yes, sir. It looks like a house." This information didn't make the situation better. It made it more confusing, and therefore more dangerous. Was it a CIA black site disguised as a home? Was it a rogue operation? Or was it a new American weapon, capable of being deployed from anywhere? Petrenko couldn't take the chance. He initiated the Level 3 alert protocols. In bunkers across the Soviet Union, keys were inserted into control panels. The world just got half a step closer to the edge. Chapter 6. The slide back in Seattle. The students watched in horror as the numbers on the screen stabilized. Calibration complete. New target acquired. "What is it looking at now?" Daniel asked, his voice barely a whisper. Sarah checked the coordinates on the screen against her maps. She traced the latitude and longitude. Her finger stopped. She looked up, her face pale. "It's not looking at Seattle anymore," she said. "We tilted it south. It's looking at Hanford." The Hanford site, the decommissioned nuclear production complex in eastern Washington. But more importantly, the site of active nuclear reactors and waste storage. By pointing a Soviet spy satellite directly at a sensitive nuclear facility, they had inadvertently simulated a targeting run. To any observer, it looked like the satellite was locking on for a strike or a detailed damage assessment before a strike. "We have to turn it back," Marcus said, "right now. If we send another command, we might make it worse," Daniel argued. "We might deorbit the damn thing and crash it into the Space Needle. If we leave it pointing at a nuclear site, the Air Force is going to shoot it down, and then they're going to come for us." The argument was cut short by a sound that every technology enthusiast in the 1980s dreaded. The sound of a connection being forcibly severed. The screen on the Commodore 64 went black. The text vanished. The hiss of the radio speakers changed tone, shifting from the digital growl to a flat, empty static. "Did we lose the signal?" Daniel asked. "No," Marcus said, pointing at the interface box. "The signal didn't drop. We were jammed. Someone, somewhere nearby, had just flooded the frequency with white noise so powerful it drowned out the satellite. It wasn't the Soviets. They were too far away to jam a downlink locally." "Who jammed us?" Sarah asked. Marcus walked to the window and peered through the rain-slicked glass. Down on the street, parked 2 houses away, was a nondescript utility van. It had no markings. It had been there for 20 minutes. On its roof, barely visible in the dark, was a small, rotating antenna array. "Guys," Marcus said, stepping back from the window, "we need to leave. Now." Chapter 7. The cleanup panic is a clumsy emotion. In the movies, characters destroy evidence with efficiency, burning papers in a sink, smashing hard drives with hammers. In reality, it was 3 terrified college students running around an attic, unplugging cables and tripping over boxes. "Take the hard drive," Daniel yelled. "It doesn't have a hard drive, it uses floppies," Marcus screamed back, shoving disks into his backpack. "What about the dish? We can't hide a 10-foot dish on the roof. Leave the dish. Just disconnect the feed. Make it look like a TV antenna." They frantically dismantled the big ear control room. The soldering irons were unplugged, the charts ripped from the walls. They shoved the custom interface box, the smoking gun that proved they had transmitted, not just listened, into a laundry basket and covered it with dirty clothes. They had just finished shoving the Commodore under a bed when the sound came. Not a siren. Sirens are for emergencies. This was the sound of authority. A heavy, rhythmic knocking on the front door downstairs. Bang, bang, bang. It echoed through the flimsy drywall of the rental house. The three students froze. They looked at each other, the shared guilt heavy in the air. "Who goes?" Sarah whispered. "I'm the leaseholder," Daniel said, trying to summon courage he didn't feel. "I'll go." Daniel walked down the stairs, his legs feeling like lead. The knocking came again, impatient. He reached the door. He didn't ask who it was. He unlocked the deadbolt and pulled it open. Standing on the porch were two men. They were soaked from the rain, wearing trench coats that were cliché but effective. They didn't look like police officers. They looked like accountants who carried guns. Behind them, the utility van was idling. "Daniel Thorne?" the taller man asked. He didn't show a badge. He didn't need to. "Yes? We'd like to talk to you about your reception issues. May we come in?" It wasn't a question. The men stepped into the hallway before Daniel could answer. The taller one looked up the stairs, directly toward the attic. "And invite your friends down, please. Mr. Lee and Ms. Jenkins. We have a lot to discuss before the sun comes up." Chapter 8. The Quiet Room. They weren't taken to a police station. They weren't read their Miranda rights. They were escorted into the back of the van and driven in silence for 40 minutes. The destination was an office building in downtown Seattle, one of those generic concrete structures that could house an insurance firm or a dentist's office. They were taken to the 4th floor, into a conference room with no windows, just fluorescent lights that hummed with a headache-inducing frequency. They sat at a long table. The two men sat opposite them. "I'm Agent Miller," the taller one said. "This is Agent Ross. We are with the Defense Investigative Service." He placed a file folder on the table. He opened it. Inside was a grainy photograph. It was a picture of their house taken from above, taken from space. "Do you know what this is?" Miller asked. "It's our house," Daniel said, his voice cracking. "It's a target package," Miller corrected. "Generated by Cosmos 1689 at 0200 hours this morning. A satellite that until 20 minutes ago was drifting peacefully in a polar orbit. Now it is tumbling." Miller leaned forward. "We have a situation, kids. NORAD is lighting up like a Christmas tree. The Soviets think we tried to blind one of their birds. They are raising their alert status. We have bombers spinning up their engines in North Dakota right now because you three wanted to see a weather map." Sarah spoke up, her voice trembling but clear. "We didn't mean to break it. It was a handshake protocol. We just sent a ping." Agent Ross, the silent one, finally spoke. "You pinged a nuclear targeting system using a Commodore 64 and a soup can. That's impressive. It's also treason." "We didn't know," Marcus cried. "Ignorance is not a defense for violating the Espionage Act," Miller said coldly. "However, we have a problem. If we arrest you, we have to admit in court that 3 college students hacked a Soviet satellite. That makes the Soviets look incompetent, which makes them angry. It also makes us look vulnerable, because you did it from American soil and we didn't stop you fast enough." The agents exchanged a look. "So," Miller said, "we are going to offer you a choice. Option A, you go to federal prison for 20 years. Your lives are over." The students stared at him, tears welling in eyes. "Option B," Miller continued, "you tell us exactly how you did it. Every line of code, every solder point. You give us the equipment. And then, you never speak of this again. To anyone. Not your parents, not your professors, not your spouses one day. This night never happened." Chapter 9. The Deconstruction. The interrogation lasted 6 hours. The agents weren't interested in why. They were interested in how. They brought in technical experts, men in short-sleeved shirts with pocket protectors who looked at Marcus's interface box with a mix of horror and admiration. "You bypassed the phase lock loop using a resistor?" one of the experts asked, holding up the circuit board. "It was the only way to sync the baud rate," Daniel mumbled. The expert shook his head. "We spent $10 million on a decryption system last year that does what this plywood box does. They took everything, the computers, the disks, the notes. They even sent a team to the house to dismantle the dish on the roof. They stripped the attic bare. By the time the sun came up over Seattle, there was no physical evidence that the Big Ear had ever existed. The agents made them sign non-disclosure agreements that were thick enough to be novels. The language was absolute. Any breach, any leak, and they would be disappeared into the darkest hole the U.S. penal system could provide. "Go back to school," Agent Miller told them as they were released onto the sidewalk in the gray morning light. "Study hard, graduate, and for God's sake, stick to cable TV." Chapter 10. The Fall. The aftermath wasn't dramatic. There were no explosions, but the friendship between Daniel, Sarah, and Marcus couldn't survive the weight of the secret. They went back to their classes, but the dynamic was broken. Every time they looked at each other, they remembered the feeling of the cold, fluorescent room and the threat of prison. Marcus dropped out of the computer science program a month later. He couldn't look at a screen without feeling a spike of panic. He moved back to Oregon and started working in his father's hardware store. Sarah finished her degree, but she abandoned astrophysics. She went into theoretical mathematics, a field where numbers stayed on the page and didn't float in the sky. Daniel stayed in engineering, but he stopped tinkering. He stopped building things. He became a safe, by-the-book engineer who followed every regulation to the letter. They drifted apart. The rental house on Elm Street was leased to new students who had no idea that their roof had once been the center of an international incident. The Cold War ground on for another few years, eventually dissolving with the Berlin Wall. But for the three students, the war had ended that rainy night in October. Chapter 11. The truth years later, in 1999, after the Soviet Union had collapsed and the archives were opened, a declassified report surfaced in a Russian aviation journal. It detailed the October incident of 1689. The report confirmed that the satellite had indeed malfunctioned. It described a hostile electronic interference that had momentarily seized control of the maneuvering thrusters. But the report contained a detail the students never knew. The command Daniel had sent, the handshake, hadn't just tilted the satellite. It had reset the exposure settings on the camera. When the satellite looked at Hanford, the exposure was set for night, but it was day. The sensor was blinded. The optics were burned out. The students hadn't just hacked the satellite, they had effectively destroyed it. A $50 million piece of Soviet hardware turned into a useless brick of metal by a 21-year-old kid who just wanted to see if his radio worked. The Soviets had assumed it was a sophisticated American anti-satellite weapon. They never suspected it was three kids in a leaky attic. The paranoia that ensued caused the Soviets to spend billions upgrading their encryption, money they didn't have, hastening the economic collapse of the USSR. In a strange butterfly effect way, the students had helped win the Cold War, but they could never claim the credit. Chapter 12. The Legacy Today. Daniel Thorne is a retired systems administrator living in the suburbs of Seattle. He still has a ham radio in his garage, though he rarely turns it on. Sometimes, late at night, when the rain is beating against the roof, he sits in his chair and listens to the static. He listens to the white noise of the universe, the hum of the invisible signals that crisscross the sky. He thinks about the night they touched the stars and the stars touched back. He thinks about the file folder on the table, the picture of his house, the crosshairs, and he remembers the most important lesson of the Cold War. Sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't a missile or a spy. Sometimes it's just curiosity, a soldering iron, and a mistake. This has been the story of the students who hacked the Cold War. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history's shadows, please like the video and share it with a friend. And don't forget to subscribe for more true stories from the edge of the abyss.